All right, guys, welcome back to another episode on YouTube. And I want to talk today about, one of my favorite books. It was the first one that I got into when I started doing self-development was Excuses Be Gone. And I love to go back through it every so often and just read it again and see how it applies to where I'm currently at in life and what's going on with me. And it's always enlightening. There's always something different I pick out from there. I get to see the highlights that I made before, and I get to see where maybe my mindset was there. And that's what today is all about. It's all about the mindset you were when you developed excuses. And that is in my opinion, this is one of the most fundamental things we can do about breaking the habits of being ourselves, right? To quote Joe Dispenza. But this book is written by Dr. Wayne Dyer, Excuses Be Gone. And just, it's phenomenal the way that he speaks to us and lets us know that, the first piece to finding the root of an excuse is to remember who we were when that excuse came up. Now, maybe that excuse came up because of life experience with a family member. Maybe it was ingrained in us since we were kids. But identifying the early places of that excuse are really what create the building blocks to develop challenging that excuse and replacing that excuse with ownership. And so what do I mean about this is that, for instance, I grew up in a very blue collar family. I always thought that, hey, I was supposed to work with my hands, barely make ends meet, put food on the table, live for the weekend to relax, and then get back out and work Monday to Friday, hard labor. I grew up that way. I grew up working on cars. I grew up detailing airplanes. Nothing we did was an easy job. And I didn't find it to be a difficult life in the sense of how hard it really is financially and how hard it is to create actual freedom. I didn't know that. But when we live that way, we don't have freedom because we're always subservient to how we make that next dollar. And I realized quickly that I was making an excuse for myself that I was just born to be part of a blue collar family. That was my life. That was my lot in life. I was supposed to be that way. And so when I got out of the military, I went into protection and I did that whole number. That was just familiar to protection or to the military, which is a lot easier. And I thought to myself, well, man, when I get out of here, how am I going to change this? Or am I going to change this? Am I just going to be doing physical labor my whole life? Like, what do I need to do? And so while I was overseas, and I'll say this, it was 2009, I started doing protection. And I was like, well, I can't, like, there's going to be some point that I don't want to be like the rest of the men in my family working when I'm in my 60s. I don't want to be doing that. And I don't want to be doing physical labor. I was like, well, how am I going to change this story? How am I going to change this narrative? Now, I hadn't read the book at this time, so I didn't know this is what I did. But what I did was I challenged the excuse and I said, no, I could be something different. I said, no, you know what? I'm going to double down. I'm going to focus on education right now. I'm going to do that while I'm doing protection. And I had a lot of buddies who bought gaming consoles and they were playing Call of Duty or fucking Madden or all kinds of shit all the goddamn time. And I was like, fucking, I'm not good at video games. I fucking hate them. They're a waste of time. Let me fucking do something else. So I doubled down on college and I did online schooling. Now, I did online schooling so I could get degrees. I ended up doing 3 degrees. And I did all of that because the fact that I was like, I need to give myself a different platform to jump off of when I get back to the States. And so I really, really applied myself and worked hard and I changed the narrative. And my narrative after that wasn't, hey, Johnny, you're just a paycheck to paycheck kind of guy. It was, hey, Johnny, you can create lasting wealth. Now, I still had limiting beliefs on what wealth looked like, and I still have limiting beliefs on how to get there. But I broke through one of the barriers and I broke through one of the excuses that I held since I was a kid. And I realized that I held this when I was a child, that this came to me at an early age. I found the root of this, and the root was when I was a kid and just watching my dad work out in the garage every weekend, every evening when he got home. I was working with my uncle. And this started at a young age. I mean, I remember seeing all this stuff for the first time around 5 years old, 6 years old. And so I then can get to the root and be like, oh, I was mimicking I was mimicking what I saw the men in my family do. I was mimicking my godfather, who I deeply respect and value. I was mimicking him. I was mimicking my father. And so that mindset was an excuse that I gave myself because that's what I saw growing up. Now, this is why we get the ability to challenge this, is because many of you listening right now have a lot of excuses that stem from other people, maybe you mimicking them, maybe how they spoke to you, maybe how you just saw them treat somebody. Like, a lot of it stems from these other places, but you can be different from that if you aren't already. And many of you carry these around as the excuses on why you can't change. But everything is changeable, guys. You are 100% changeable in this if you choose to be able to change. If you're actually telling yourself, like, hey, I don't want this anymore, there's something more for me, what can I do to do that? Well, you have to challenge the status quo. You have to challenge the mindset, and you got to understand where it came from. The root of these things is the only way that we can have a lasting change. That's the biggest thing, because we can band-aid this shit. We can habit the fuck out of it and band-aid it like a motherfucker. But what we can't do is we can't actually get to the root and create a lasting change that doesn't have the ability to resurface if we don't know where it came from. So really understanding that what you're doing in life right now is based around a lot of excuses that were given to you by people who didn't know how to model something different because they hadn't worked anything out in their lives, or from you who didn't understand how to process something differently and see a different perspective. That is where a lot of these excuses are coming from. You got to challenge them, and you got to take fucking ownership of them. So who you were at the time the excuse came up is a pivotal piece to understanding the root. Who you were, where your mindset was, how you acted, the way you saw the world. Those are all pivotal pieces to understanding an excuse and why it served you at the time, or why you believed it served you at the time. Because it probably didn't serve you. It served your ego, which was then in service of your, I call it the unaware ego, because I don't believe the ego is inherently bad, but it served your ego, which was inherently protecting your insecurities. Now, obviously, we have this ability that we desire to protect our insecurities because we don't want people to think of us as less than. We don't want people to think of us as somebody who is emasculated or not a man or less than them or not worthy of being their friends. We want people to have value for us. But part of that is we create that value by protecting a lot of our vulnerability and a lot of our insecurities. That's through ego. And ego then makes excuses of why you don't put yourself into certain experiences. And then when that came up is pivotal, because it could have been, oh, when a woman is involved, I get a lot more defensive. And I see this with a lot of guys. Get a lot more defensive, and I make an excuse that I have to one up everybody because I need to show that I'm the better man, or I need to show that I'm the fucking cock of the walk. There's all kinds of different excuses for this, but that could be yours. And then you're like, well, fuck, that doesn't serve me because it's deteriorating my relationships with the men in my life, the friends that I have in my life, and it's not making me be a guy they actually want to be around or bring women around. So then all of a sudden you just become the guy that goes out with the boys. You never become the guy that gets invited on the date nights. You never get invited to the couples retreats, right? And so that could be a hard pill to swallow, because when you realize that, you're like, fuck, man, it's always like me and the boys, but like I'd love to bring my girlfriend or my wife around, but because you become a defensive asshole and you got an excuse that says that you're just an asshole, or you got an excuse that says that you're having to protect, you're having to show people how cool you are, you're not taking ownership of it. And that excuse is dividing your life. It's dividing who you are. And it's ultimately causing you to not be authentic when you go out with these people. And therefore, you're not having the relationships that you want. So just remember, your excuses in this area, of life in general, of just the ability to define, your inability to define where something came up, is causing you to either band-aid it or causing you to continually, perpetually have this involved in your life and the way that you interact with people. So identifying who you were is a pivotal piece to the puzzle for all you guys out there. Like I said, in my story, who I was at that time was a kid growing up in a blue collar family, seeing what was what, and how they all were providing for us so that we had a roof over our head, we had vehicles to get around, and we had food on the table, right? The three main components. So when I saw that, that was the belief system I created. That was the excuse I created that prevented me from doing other things like trying to pursue being a professional soccer player or trying to pursue a white collar job instead of going somewhere else, like, or trying to pursue something outside of security or military because the fact that that's all I knew, right? Like these were stories I made up that I wasn't good enough for something else. There's another story underlying all of that for education where I was told when I was younger that I was just like average. I wasn't actually a smart kid. My brother was the prized, child when it came to intelligence. Everybody loved him for it. I wasn't. It's kind of like the black sheep, kind of destructive in my own ways. I wasn't super intelligent, or I was intelligent. I was told I wasn't super intelligent and treated as such. So when I got to that point in my life in 2009 where I was like, oh, I think it's time to just do college because I need to give myself a leg up, I had to overcome the second story. And the second story for me was I was not smart enough. And then when I realized I was getting A's and I was magna cum laude and everything else in school, I was like, holy fuck, like this is crazy. I've never been this high level in education, but I was excelling because I stopped having the limitation that I wasn't smart enough and I started applying myself. And in that moment, I ended up creating a new version of this and I got rid of the excuse. I took ownership of it. I challenged it and I overcame it. And then from then on, it was all, look, I've never had that question in my life. I've never said I couldn't learn something. I've never not done something because of the fact that I didn't think I couldn't absorb it. I will always try to do that, but that's the story that I flipped in my life to get there. So for all you guys out there, know who you were at the time when an excuse came up, challenge the excuse, and then give yourself the ability to change that, because once you know it's an excuse, you can take ownership of it and you can create the new life that you desire. All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll see y'all next week.